And I'm going to reserve my deepest anger for next week. And I'm going to hate to say it, I'm going to reserve it for our fellow Jews, certain types and stripes. Right? And I call that the unkindest cut of all, recalling the Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, how it is Julius Caesar is stabbed by his best friend Brutus. So that'll be for next week. So this week, I look at enablers of Hamas and look back 75 years. It'll be between this week and last week. So I know that everybody is now on the bandwagon for a ceasefire, hinting at it, not pushing at it. We want to be nice. We want to be good guys. Was there a ceasefire in the middle of the firebombing of Dresden by the British and the English? No. Was there a ceasefire in the middle of the firebombing of Tokyo with hundreds of thousands dead? No. You put a ceasefire when it's possible. How do you put a ceasefire in place when you're in the middle of how do you put a ceasefire in place when you're in the middle of a tunnel facing Hamas terrorists? And you know that the minute, ceasefire, minute ceasefire is over, their guns are behind your back. Boom, gone. So how do you put it in place? Okay, so you can put partial ceasefires, here and there. Things can be negotiated, worked out. No trust with the Hamas at all. I see that when they talk about ceasefire now among the Arab states, they're talking about we need to solve Gaza and we need to bring in another administration. Who's going to get rid of the current administration of Hamas? Only Israel. So the blood will be on Jewish hands and the saviors will be the Arabs. Right? That's same old story, same old story. So it's bizarre to be in a Jewish world which denies you the right to defend yourself. Just test. Yeah, okay, can't get it right. It rushes to judgment for every wrongdoing. Now it was an ambulance that was hit. Maybe it was an ambulance with patients. 60 people got out of the ambulance, something like that. So something doesn't sound right in it. That's what was reported. As I said, it was carrying, as ambulances have been used in the past, terrorist soldiers from one place to the other. So even when we do it the right way, we're getting blamed, which leads us to say that maybe we shouldn't care. But when you blame for no reason, then you stop caring. So we have the Secretary General of the UN explaining, as this whole event unfolded, he explained the way the actions of Hamas are trying to be even-handed, because he's got to deal with 100 Muslim and Arab countries, right? So they pay the bills also, sort of, after the United States, and the United States to the United States. Palestinian people have been subject to 56 years of suffocating occupation. I love this phrase. It's been bounced around, 56 years of suffocating occupation. I've seen it in many claims justifying what has happened. They're frustrated. So I look at this word 56, that's since the Six-Day War, 56 years. And it's been repeatedly used in propaganda to cover up for Hamas dirty deeds. I say they're Sodom and Gomorrah in their deeds, but no, it's frustration. Sodom and Gomorrah are very frustrated for having wealth. So why not then, why stop 56 years? Why not go back 75 years from 1948? That's the Nakba. That's when it started. So what happened in 1948? From 1948 till the Six-Day War, what was happening to the Palestinians? Well, Britannica mentions, during 20 years, the Gaza Strip was under Egyptian control, 48 to 67, remained little more than a reservation, a concentration camp. That's what we're told. They did it to themselves. Egyptian rule was generally repressive. That's their brothers. Yahi, my brother. Nevertheless, under Egyptian oppression, they found the energy to launch Fedayeen attacks from Gaza Strip onto Israeli settlements. We know that repeatedly, right? Occupation by Egyptians, not by us. Okay, why not go back 100 years? Because that's when the British took over, right after World War II, World War I. Division of the old Ottoman Empire, Sykes-Picot split up and they, lopped off what was considered historically on the old maps Palestine, which was both sides of the Jordan River, big country, gave 90% to Hashemite kingdom because they owed him one for for leading the rebellion against the Turks. So, and then what was left was under British administration. So why not go back 100 years? And 100 years ago was remember this attack on October 7th was called the Al-Aqsa flood? Because over and over again, the Jews are taking the Aqsa. You know when it started? 100 years ago, when there were no Jews with armies capable of taking over the Al-Aqsa Mount. What happened was that a little space was set, it was cleaned up by the Western Wall, the little tiny space that the Arabs allowed Jews to have, and some benches were put there. That was the Jewish takeover of Al-Aqsa Mount, and Hussein, what's his name, the Grand Mufti Hajj Amin Husseini, started his campaign on that basis. The Jews are taking over. 100 years ago, no occupation. But the Jewish community of Gaza was wiped out to the last man, woman, and child. Those survived, kicked out. A Jewish settlement that was there for centuries and centuries and centuries. Some of the great Kabbalistic teachers were there, wiped out, vanished, no trace. And then, of course, Hebron, city of the ancestors, the burial place of the ancestors. There are ancestors. We got more ancestors buried there than the Muslims do. The Muslims have Abraham. They don't have Sarah. That's not theirs. But we get Isaac, Jacob, right? The whole gang. We're not allowed in there. Since the Muslim takeover, we were not allowed there. We were allowed only to go up to the 7th step before the entrance to the cave of Machpelah, but there was a Jewish community there. 1926, Jews were massacred and expelled. Judenrein. I'm going to use that term, Judenrein. Hajj Amin al-Husseini, we know, worked hand in hand with Hitler. We know that. But that was no Jewish occupation, no Israeli occupation. Massacres that continued into the 30s, 40s. Yeah, we massacred back. We hit back, yes. Yes, we hit back. We were going to sit quiet and be slaughtered like in the Kishinev pogrom, in the Kiev pogroms. Ekaterinslav pogroms. Now where? Why don't we go back, Secretary General, why not go back several centuries before? The Ottoman Empire rose to power in the 1200s, 1300s. They took over right after the Mongols wiped out both the Crusaders and the Arab caliphs, wiped the slate clean. The Turks began to come in and take over and take control. And so they dominate that territory for many centuries. They actually brought Jews in to help. Actually, they were nice to Jews. They brought in Jews because they thought we'd be good administrators. Let a few Jewish settlers in Safed, in Tzfat, and in Jerusalem. But basically, neglected the land. It wasn't useful for them. The Al-Aqsa Mosque was not significant for them. It was number 3. It was built by one of the Caliph's successors to Muhammad because he wanted to lay claim to King Solomon's temple. But then it never was dominant in Islam like Mecca and Medina. Never was. Only became dominant when the Hashemite kingdom said, you know, we used to be the sheriff of Mecca, the real place. Till those even Sauds kicked us out, so we're going to build up Jerusalem. That's what they did. So anyway, what happened? It was land that was misadministered and neglected. I know the Palestinians like to say, oh, it was not an empty land. We had the orchards in Yaffo, but there were no orange trees at that time in Yaffo, and it was brought in from other places, the actual orange trees. We had these beautiful fields. All right, so then you look at pictures, actual photographs. And then they sold to the Jews coming in only the swamplands where people would die of malaria. Okay. Land was misadministered also. Under the Turkish system, you have the bakshish system of administration, which is you got a court case, you stick your money inside an ornate copy of the Quran. Whoever has the bigger package wins the case. That's the system of administration that was, whether the Turks wanted it or not, that's what was happening. And they tried modernization, but not to knock the Turks. They were beginning to put modern administration in certain areas, but it didn't work there. The land was fought over as you come into the 18th century, Napoleonic Wars, the British defense going back and forth over the land, right? And then rebellions. There were rebellions. Palestinians tried to rebel against the Turkish overlords, didn't work, put down. Then the Turks and the Egyptians fighting back and forth over this land also. Forget about that. So there's not much left of that land when they're all finished. And then little mini-states and warlords also. Each one a little fiefdom to himself, fighting on territory and turf, warring on each other. Okay, so that's how far back we should go if you want to talk about occupation. Why not, Mr. Secretary General? Well, let's go forward. Let's go forward. Some numbers. Genocide numbers. Miskin. Poor people. Concentration camps. So once Israel was there in 67, from 67 to 82, Gaza Strip went to a 9.7% per annum GDP growth, due in part because they could get jobs inside Israel. Because when they were under the Egyptians, they had no jobs. They were being fed by the UN. In other words, the beginning of that 56 years that the Secretary talked about suffocating occupation was the first time Palestinians could support themselves by themselves, and they could get outside the borders of Gaza because they could go into Israel. They were allowed in. Because then it wasn't nice because you still had terrorists operating out of it, so there was always constant going in, going out. But then 94 was supposed to solve the problem. Oslo, of course, and Gaza was given to its own people. The very first place was Gaza. The PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, Arafat, came into Gaza first. Well, it was liberated then. There was no longer an occupation. But the terror attacks did not stop. Opportunities opened up, attacks did not stop. And then 2005, as we felt betrayed by Arafat, Sharon had the great strategic thinker, failed in this strategic thinking. He said, okay, we'll just pull out, let them mess themselves up. It's their business. Pulled out fully from Gaza. Hamas was voted into power 2 years later because we wanted to show democracy. Be careful what you pray for. And the terror attacks went worse, right? No occupation. Israel did not close the borders because it wanted to close the borders. It closed the borders because Hamas was using it. The Palestinians were using it. If there's a wall around the West Bank, it's not because Israel needed the wall, because they didn't want Palestinians, because the Palestinians coming in were blowing up kids. Simple, simple, simple. So if anybody was forcibly evacuated in those periods, it was Israelis. Israel evacuated beautiful towns in the Sinai desert in exchange for peace with the Egyptians. Yamit, beautiful place. The people were moved by force because that was the price of peace with Egypt, and it was valuable. Then with Sharon, Gush Katif, 17 settlements whose inhabitants had to be removed by force. And I remember this, and everybody was angry at them. How come you're sitting stubborn? So they had to be removed by force by the Israeli army. And there was the illusion, well, doing it would lead the Gazans to come to grips and accommodate themselves with Israel. Pitiful, pitiful consequence for us all. So this is the concentration camp. So what kind of concentration? Look at this. How do you have a high life expectancy in a concentration camp? Joe, how long do people live in the camps? How many days do they drop dead? A few days. Okay. United States, this is a little bit old statistic. I have an expert here, thank you, Joe, to tell me what it's like. So this was a few years old. So life expectancy US was 80, right? Lebanon, 77, a little bit less. Independent country, 77. United Arab Emirates, sold the oil, 77. Morocco, 77. They don't have any big wars. Libya, even with Libya under Gaddafi, the Meshuggah, the crazy Gaddafi, 76. West Bank, 76. Wait a minute. West Bank with no oil money, people live just as long as in Libya with lots of oil money. And Tunisia, 76. Oh, Tunisians are they're much more westernized, 76 also. Well, even the people in Oman who have oil money don't live as long as the people in the West Bank. The Saudis with all their oil and wealth and power don't live as long as people in the West Bank, 75. Who does live as long as the Saudis? The Gazans. The Gazans, 75. The Gazans, 75. Jordans, They live better in Gaza than in Jordan, where people die at 74, or in Egypt at 73. Or how about Turkey, which is a major power, a major manufacturing power, very advanced country. It's like Europe. They die at 73. Wait, the Gazans die at 75 with Israeli oppression. The Turks, with all their power, die at 73. Iraq, 71. Okay, Iraq, I can understand. But Iran, 71. Oh, the Ayatollahs, the Khomeinis who liberated the Iranians from the Shah, they dropped dead at 71. And the Russians at 70. 70 is an improvement because it was 50. Mainly they died because of alcohol. Am I correct? That was the main cause of death. Yeah. So that I can understand. So 2014 statistics, but isn't it telling after 50 some years of oppression and occupation and genocide, the Gazans did better than Jordan, Egypt, and Turkey, or the nuclear and space powered Russia? That's genocide. And as asked Joe, life expectancy in Buchenwald and the other camps, Dachau, zip, zilch. So yeah, we have the TV filled with images of destroyed buildings in northern Gaza. We have babies being pulled out of the rubble, and it's heartbreaking. Yes, it's horrible, but unlike the surprise attack against Israel on October 7th, Israel gave the people of northern Gaza plenty of time to move south, and many did. And just as Israel evacuated hundreds of thousands from the border territories and also from the north, they evacuated an entire city, Kiryat Shmona. But everybody blames Israel for making those people evacuate. Doesn't say anything about evacuating your own population. Well, international laws, you're not even allowed to evacuate your own population by force. But that's okay. You're telling them to run away, be safe, you're condemned. You tell them stay put, you're condemned. So international organizations condemn Israel for telling people to leave the battlefield, even though that is the obligation under military international law. Recognize international law. You notify the people to get out when the attack is going to happen. We told them. Of course, we know the roads were also blocked by Hamas. We know that too. If there's civilians there, sadly they're kept there by Hamas as their hostages. So we have 240 Israeli hostages. We had 1,000 American hostages, all those Americans held who were not allowed out, and now they're allowed out in drips and drabs. Another 200 or so British citizens held hostage. Nobody talks about them being hostages. They're hostages to Hamas because the door is open. Gaza, Rafah crossing is open. Hamas doesn't let them through. So now they're letting them out in drips and drabs because they're pawns in their great game. And always Israel's fault. So we see, if Hamas or jihadi rockets are fired towards Israel and they land, though, half the time on civilians, that's Israel's fault, especially if it lands on a hospital. So we will see, and we're seeing images horrible as this. Okay, terrible bombing of these buildings. Is it the Gaza Strip? No. It is the Syrian city of Aleppo, beautiful city, ancient historic city, Halab, destroyed under Assad. Some 230,000 civilians dead in Syria at the hands of their own brothers. That's okay. When Arabs kill Arabs, okay. How about this building? Is this the Gaza Strip? And again, no, this is the Syrian city of Raqqa after the war against ISIS. 1,600 civilians killed there, 10,000 civilians in Mosul alone by American forces to free the Middle East from ISIS. This is their own doing. Or maybe this is it. This one. Got a voice back on. Okay. Hold on, let me just off 1 second. That's it. Okay. Oh, sorry. Just back on. So you recognize this one. That's not Gaza. Blue helmets. That is in the Ukraine. Zaporizhia, Ukraine after Russian missile attack. That's 120,000 dead between military and civilian just on the Ukrainian side. I don't know how many on the Russian side. This is what Russia did to Ukraine. Remember, Ukraine is the little brother. Kievan Rus, right? The little Kiev, Russia. So where were the massive protests? The massive marches? Did people take to the streets? No. Does anybody know that a month ago an entire nation was destroyed, wiped off the map? The independent state of Nagorno-Karabakh. is an Armenian enclave inside Azerbaijan. It had been taken over by the Armenians about 30 years ago. The Azeris had sat on it, and they squeezed them out. And this last month, they went in full force. 500 Armenians were killed, and 100 and something thousand were exiled entirely, completely. I think there are 4 left by last report, 4. Did anyone other than Armenians shed a tear? And you see, anybody except for Armenians, they couldn't get many allies here to march with them. Or is it that Christians expelled by Muslims is a non-issue? Or that they were not attacked by a Jewish state makes it a non-issue? Now I see lots of articles pitying the poor Christians of Gaza Strip because they've sat there for centuries. No, Jews are left, nobody pitied them. But the Christians, why are there only a few Christians left in the Gaza Strip? It's like 0.1%, something like that. Why? Because the rest were expelled over the course of time under the extremist Muslim rule. That's why they trot out always their token Christians who are suffering. In the meantime, Bethlehem, which was an all-Christian city, has become almost all Muslim cities. Similarly, through the rest of where there were Christian settlements in the Middle East, throughout the Middle East. So nobody took to the streets because they weren't attacked by a Jewish state. So it's a non-issue. I look at Code Pink. You saw last week, Code Pink at some point went into a Senate hearing and showed blood on their arms, calling for a ceasefire. And I realized, I look at Code Pink's history. Never once did they protest any tyranny. Never once. Unless it was to be blamed on the United States or Israel specifically. They have no other existence. So they support Venezuela, the dictator in Venezuela. They supported him actively. They started to say something about China, then they shut up, said nothing. They did protest U.S. aid to Ukraine. Who's paying these bills for some of these organizations? I think we're going to find out a lot of things, surprisingly, about who is pulling some of the strings for these. We know this in the academies, where the money's coming from, the U.S. academies. So now I'm going to pull into my pet peeve with the LA Times now. And I'm not going to blame the LA Times. I think they're reporting, they're trying to cover what they can. So they had an op-ed today from someone about the Muslims being scared to death. There was, sadly enough, the sad killing of a child by a deranged landlord. Okay. How many Jews have been killed in this over the last 20 years? Let's just say since 9/11, much more than Muslims were killed. How many children attacked? How many university students attacked physically? But they're afraid of Islamophobia. In the meantime, the statistics on Islamophobia is very low, very low. Judeophobia is big. It is statistically. Now it's grown. But they're getting the limelight. Because they don't like somebody to steal the limelight from them. They want the people to take the sympathy away from us. That's all it is. So here's another example. So we have a fight in the trenches all the time. The editor of the letters section of LA Times runs a regular newsletter, like an editorializing about some contemporary issues. Generally, it's nice, fine, Paul Thornton. And he was talking about really the problem the media got itself into when they blamed Israel right away. So here he's making a very good case for being careful before you rush to judgment. But even in explaining that there was a rush to judgment, you could see that he put in a backhanded compliment right in the middle of it. So this was his opening from his article. It's a subject line. It says, subject line on an email from New York Times was shocking. Breaking news, Israel strike on hospitals kills hundreds, Palestinian officials say. Horrified as I was at the thought of 500 Palestinians killed while seeking care and refuge inside a Gaza Strip hospital, I was also skeptical. The source of the Israel airstrike claim was Hamass, which controls the Gaza Strip. I'll reserve judgment as to whether this continues, as to whether news organizations messed up on this. Reporters and editors covering this war operate under immense pressure. This week should remind us to be more circumspect about passing off any government's statement as fact. That's fine. So far, so good. Then he has this line, and he's trying to justify being careful about not jumping the gun. He says, yes, Israel has despicably lied about past atrocities. No reason to dismiss credible evidence that might not have murdered hundreds of civilians at this time, especially when something so incendiary can lead to anti-Semitic violence elsewhere. Well, we know that headline caused riots around the world. We know it. We know it's not might have. We know it. But notice that he underlined in his newsletter, and I underlined it here, despicably lied. Now it's underlined in the newspaper, in the newsletter, with a pink line or an orange line, which indicates it's a link to another source. So he's giving you a source. So I clicked on the link, despicably lied. So it is Al Jazeera. So I open the article, and let me see if I can get it up here. And what is that article from Al Jazeera? Let's see if I can get it to come up. Did it work? Yeah, okay. Well, okay, yeah, it won't show on the screen. It's an editorial from Al Jazeera blaming the Israelis for the journalist Abu Akla and lying about it. Okay. So much for that. Yeah. By the way, they have good reporters. It's their editorialization, obviously. That's where they make their money from. That's how they get paid by Qatar to play the games. So anyway, so I replied to him, and I'm still waiting a response. 2 weeks, and I sent a copy to the supervising editors. Got no reply. I appreciate that you're calling on me to reserve judgment until facts are in. I found the blood libel of the claim of Israel's targeting of a hospital in Gaza such a classic example of a kind of the blood libel about the massacre in Jenin 20 years ago, widely reported as truth, even though no massacre took place. However, I resent what is a snide explanation about the rush to judgment being a consequence of despicable lies by Israelis. Statement marked by link to the source, an opinion piece for nothing less than Al Jazeera, wholly owned subsidiary of Qatar, headquarters to Hamas and associated with Muslim Brotherhood. The editorial leads with the phrase despicable lies, but refers directly only to the tragic death of Al Jazeera reporter Abu Akla. Here, Israel did eventually accept responsibility for an accidental, not intentional killing, an admission the likes of which was never done by the other side. So I know, if you wish, let me just say, there are reports about how many reporters are being killed by Israelis. Nobody's reported how many reporters have been hounded and persecuted in the West Bank. Or how when reporters get out, they say, the truth is that we're not allowed to say what we want to say when we're inside Gaza. So what we said is only what the Hamas will tell us, right? Nothing about that. So if you wish the Times, like other major media, to retain a smidgen of journalistic integrity, you must avoid snide insinuations. Your colleagues must also acknowledge that the rush to judgment has resulted in additional violence around the world to the Jewish community and salt on the wound for both sides. Okay, so those are I'm venting my spleen now. Next week I have more to vent, and that's on my fellow Jews. I'll talk about that as we come to Kristallnacht. And we're going to wrap now. To everybody, I wish all Shabbat Shalom to those who are viewing us outside as well. To everybody, Shabbat Shalom. Everything good. And maybe next week will be Shabbat Shalom. Okay, we're going to make Kiddush.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.